There's a different kind of energy surrounding this moment for the Dallas Cowboys, and it all starts with a possibility that, not long ago, felt almost out of reach. The conversation today shifts toward the draft, toward that unpredictable night where expectations collide with reality, and where one unexpected slide can completely reshape the future of a franchise. And right now, there's a name quietly gaining traction in that conversation, a name that is starting to feel less like a fantasy and more like a scenario that, while unlikely, cannot be completely dismissed. The idea of Caleb Diaz being available when Dallas is on the clock at number 12 is the kind of thought that keeps fans refreshing updates, replaying scenarios, and imagining how the defense would transform overnight. It is not being framed as something probable, not even close to that, but the fact that it is even being discussed seriously by people deeply connected to the draft world changes everything. When someone with a strong understanding of how front offices think begins to suggest that this is not impossible, it forces you to reconsider what you thought you knew about how the board might fall. What makes this situation so fascinating is how it highlights the unpredictable nature of the safety position in the draft. Year after year, players at that spot find themselves slipping further than their talent would suggest. It is not always about production or film. Sometimes it is about measurements, about perceived limitations, about how a player looks next to others during the pre-draft process. And that is where things begin to get interesting with Caleb Diaz, because while his tape shows consistency, intelligence, and impact, the traditional metrics do not scream elite in the way that teams often prioritize early. There's a pattern here that cannot be ignored. Safeties, even highly graded ones, rarely dominate the top 10 picks unless they fit a very specific physical mold or bring undeniable traits that front offices cannot pass on. When you look at past drafts, you start to see how often elite talent at that position ends up waiting longer than expected. That trend alone creates a small opening, a narrow window where a player like Diaz could begin to slide just enough for a team like Dallas to start paying very close attention. And when you dive into his game, you begin to understand why there is such a strong push from those who believe in his value. He may not be the tallest or the longest defender on the field, but what he brings goes far beyond measurements. His instincts stand out immediately. There is a natural feel to the way he reads plays, reacting before the action fully develops, putting himself in position to disrupt without needing to rely purely on athletic dominance. That kind of awareness is not something you can easily teach, and it shows up consistently when you watch him over multiple seasons. Another key element is how comfortable he looks closer to the line of scrimmage. This is not a player who relies on being a deep roaming safety, making highlight plays downfield. Instead, his impact is felt in tighter spaces, where decisions have to be made quickly and physicality becomes essential. He thrives in those situations, stepping into gaps, supporting the run, and occasionally bringing pressure in ways that can catch offenses off guard. It is a different style, one that may not always generate the flashy moments, but one that builds a strong, reliable defensive foundation. That reliability is part of what makes this discussion so compelling for Dallas. There's been a long-standing desire to find a defensive presence in the secondary who can do more than just fill a role, someone who elevates the unit as a whole. And that is where the conversation shifts from pure talent to overall impact. Because with Diaz, the belief is not just about what he does individually, but how his presence influences communication, positioning, and the cohesion of the entire defense. There's also something to be said about leadership, especially at a position that operates so close to the center of the action. Players in that area often serve as the connective tissue of the defense, making adjustments, reading formations, and ensuring everyone is aligned before the snap. Diaz has shown signs of being that kind of presence, someone whose awareness extends beyond his own assignment and into the structure of the defense as a whole. That type of influence does not always show up in statistics, but it can be the difference between a good unit and a great one. Of course, none of this guarantees that he will still be available when Dallas makes its selection. The draft has a way of correcting itself, with teams eventually recognizing value and stepping in before a player falls too far. But at the same time, every year brings surprises. Prospects who seem locked into a certain range suddenly slip due to a combination of factors that, individually, might not seem significant, but together create hesitation among decision-makers. And that is where the tension builds. Because even if the odds remain low, the mere existence of a pathway changes how this draft is being viewed. It introduces that sense of anticipation, the possibility that something unexpected could unfold, and that Dallas could find itself in position to capitalize on a rare opportunity. It is that balance between realism and hope that makes this situation so captivating, especially for those who understand how quickly narratives can shift once the picks start coming in. As the conversation continues to build, what really adds fuel to this scenario is the contrast between how teams evaluate talent and what shows up on the field. Because when you isolate the film, when you focus strictly on performance, there's a strong argument that Caleb Diaz consistently plays at a level that should lock him into an early selection. Yet the draft has never been just about performance. It is about projection, preference, and sometimes hesitation, especially when a prospect does not check every traditional box that front offices tend to prioritize. That is where the uncertainty becomes a factor. Teams begin to overanalyze details that may or may not translate into actual limitations at the professional level. Height, arm length, testing numbers, and perceived positional value all start to shape decisions in ways that can push a player slightly down the board. And when that happens across multiple teams, even subtly, it creates the kind of ripple effect that opens the door for a slide that few initially expected. But that is what keeps the conversation alive. The uncertainty, the possibility, the idea that even a small chance is enough to change how this draft is being viewed. It creates a sense of anticipation that builds with every passing moment, especially as more perspectives emerge and more information begins to shape expectations. And as the draft approaches, the focus will only intensify. Evaluations will be revisited, discussions will become more detailed, and the gap between projection and reality will begin to close. Yet even with all of that, there will always be room for the unexpected, for the kind of outcome that no one can fully predict, but everyone is quietly hoping for. What makes this entire situation even more intriguing is how draft boards are never identical across the league. Fans often look at rankings and mock drafts as if they represent a universal order, but inside team facilities the evaluations can be very different. One franchise might see a player as a top 5 talent, while another might view the same player as someone who fits better in the middle of the first round. Those differences in evaluation are exactly what create unexpected slides every single year, and that is why a scenario like this cannot be completely dismissed. Another factor that always plays a role is team need versus best player available. Some organizations draft purely based on their board, while others lean heavily toward positional needs. When several teams ahead of Dallas already feel comfortable at safety or are prioritizing offensive positions, edge rushers, or cornerbacks that can quietly push a player down without it being a reflection of his actual talent level. The draft is often more about timing than people realize, and sometimes a player simply lands in the wrong sequence of team needs. If you start imagining the board falling in a certain way, the scenario becomes easier to picture. Quarterbacks always push other players down. Offensive tackles and pass rushers usually dominate the early selections. Then you have wide receivers and cornerbacks, positions that teams are constantly trying to upgrade because of how pass-heavy the league has become. By the time all of those positions begin to come off the board, the draft can look very different from what people expected months earlier. And if Dallas finds itself on the clock with that opportunity sitting there, the decision would feel both simple and enormous at the same time. Simple because the value would be obvious, but enormous because draft picks like that can shape a defense for years. Hitting on a player who becomes a defensive leader changes not only the depth chart, but also the identity of the unit. Suddenly, you are not just filling a position, you're building around someone who can stabilize the middle of the field and bring consistency week after week. There's also something psychological about adding a player who has a reputation for intelligence and awareness on the field. Defenses often improve not just because of physical talent, but because communication becomes cleaner, alignments become faster, and mistakes decrease. One player who understands a game at a high level can line everyone up properly, anticipate motion, and help teammates react faster. Those small advantages add up over the course of a season. So as the draft approaches and the speculation continues, this possibility will remain in the back of everyone's mind. Maybe it never materializes. Maybe another team takes him earlier and the conversation ends immediately. But until that moment arrives, the idea will continue to grow. And sometimes in the draft, all it takes is one unexpected decision early in the night to change everything that comes after, and suddenly a situation that once felt almost impossible starts to feel very real. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Dallas Cowboys. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments as well. Whispers are growing louder around Dallas Cowboys headquarters, and at the center of the storm stands Brandon Aubrey. What once seemed like a quiet success story has now turned into a potential tug-of-war that could shake the franchise's special teams foundation. Sources close to league circles suggest that an unnamed AFC contender has tabled what insiders are already calling a can't-ignore offer for the Cowboys' standout kicker. The proposal, while not officially confirmed, is believed to go beyond standard expectations for a player at his position, both in financial terms and long-term security. That alone has sparked unease in Dallas, where Aubrey's reliability has quickly elevated him into one of the most trusted weapons on the roster. Within the organization, there's a growing sense of urgency. While the Cowboys have historically prioritized star power and skill positions, Aubrey's consistency has quietly become a cornerstone. Letting him walk, or worse, losing him to a direct conference rival, would not only create a gap on the field, but could also send a troubling message about how the franchise values emerging talent. Behind the scenes, negotiations are rumored to be intensifying. Some believe Dallas is preparing a counteroffer, possibly restructuring internal priorities to ensure Aubrey remains in Texas. Others, however, caution that the AFC bid might already be stretching beyond what the Cowboys are willing to commit to a kicker, no matter how dependable. Around the league, executives are watching closely. In an era where margins are razor-thin, a reliable leg can be the difference between heartbreak and glory. If the rumors prove true, this could become one of the most intriguing under-the-radar battles of the offseason. For now, nothing is official, but the mere possibility of Aubrey changing conferences has already stirred debate among fans and analysts alike. In Dallas, the question lingers: is their most precise weapon about to become someone else's secret advantage? That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.